Okay, everything is up and running.
Good morning. This is the Tuesday, March 9th, 2021 meeting of the Dunn County Planning, Resource and Development Committee and the Land Conservation Committee. I see from our screen that all members of the committee are present, plus County Board Chair. So we have a quorum. I'll call the meeting to order. Approval of the minutes for February 23rd. Can I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I will move approval.
Supervisor Morehouse, thank you. Second?
Supervisor Bjork, seconds.
Thank you, Supervisor Bjork. Any questions, discussion, revisions? Okay. All in favor of approval, say aye.
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 Opposed? Motions are approved. Minutes are approved. Do we have any public comment today?
No
Krista or
public
Tom?
comment.
Okay. We have no public hearing, so we'll move on to our regular staff reports, which we all received. Tom, if you can scroll down through them, we can first register of deeds. Any questions?
Yeah, Supervisor Kinnear here. I'm just curious about the shredding part. So you shred some? Is Heather here?
Is Heather on?
I'm here. Hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. As far as the shredding goes, is that your question, Mike?
That's the question was shredding and what's happening there.
Yep. So there's just our vital records requests. The retention schedule states we have to keep those a couple years. So, you know, we're kind of rotating those records through. So yeah, certain things we can shred. not most records are permanent, but there's certain correspondence and our applications for vital records, those are shredded. So that's all that is.
Yeah, I was just curious, kind of like at home. You can get rid of some things each year, huh?
Exactly. Just cleaning house.
Sounds good. Okay, moving on to environmental services. Planning resource. Tom Carlson.
Supervisor, can you hear again?
Yep.
Chairman Quinn?
Yes. Mike, I can hear you.
Are we still on B?
We are on B now, yes.
Are we? Yeah. I have a question. It said Heather completed the accomplishments. She listed the accomplishments on the Red Cedar watershed quality, and that sounds interesting. Is that a list of the things that we've been doing, Chase?
Yes, good morning, Supervisor Kinnear. Yeah, basically in my report, I tried to give a little touch base on what individuals were up to for the last month. And, you know, Heather's working on a report for that Red Cedar Basin work group, part of the implementation plan. So basically looking at all the activities we conducted within that Red Cedar Basin in 2020 and providing that report to that working group so they can compile the broader report for the entire basin and implementation for that TMDL project.
Well, that sounds interesting. It's kind of nice because that's a list of the good things going on. Are we going to see that, or is that more of a technical paper?
I guess I have to find out yet to see where that's at. It's something I haven't experienced yet. That is likely a report that my guess would be public. So once that's compiled, I will be sure to share it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'd note that the Regional Planning Office completed a overall report for the 5-year period of the partnership. And at some point, that's going to be presented at the Red Cedar Conference on Thursday. But we could also have that, or maybe incorporate two of them into do a presentation to the committee. It's really interesting information. Okay, but going back up to the survey division, is there any questions there? Okay, then we did planning and zoning. Any questions?
I have a question, but not on this report, but for Mr. Colson, if that's okay.
This is his report, so yeah.
Bob, I was looking at that wedding barn at the Board of Adjustment that's just west of the like Knapp. Can you hear me, Robert?
You're muted, Bob.
Here, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And what caught my attention was that stream. And he said that he's owned the land for like 7 years. In the last 3 years, because of high water table, he has a little creek there, which is 6 inches in diameter across.
Yes.
And according to what you were saying in the paper, Dunn County Shoreline Ordinances regulates intermittent streams.
Correct.
So the county will regulate it as a navigable stream. How can you, am I reading this wrong, but how can you say a 6 inch body of water to be navigable? Aren't we kind of taking liberties with the English language?
No, I don't think so. Let me, so in our shoreline ordinance, it says, you know, it defines what's navigable, and the county and the DNR have the authority to deem navigability. And so in our ordinance, it says that any blue line, whether it's a solid blue line or an intermittent blue line, which is a dashed line on the USG quad map, if it shows up on the quad map, the county deems that navigable. But there are other bodies of water that may not show up on the quad map. And in those cases, if we have a question, we will go to the DNR, or the applicant can go to the DNR and get a determination whether it's navigable or not. So the fact that it shows up on our USGS quad map gives the county the authority to say this falls under the jurisdiction of our shoreline ordinance.
But my only question was, if that is navigable, then it's under the same jurisdiction, same regulations as, say, the Red Cedar River, and that doesn't seem right. You know, because they're two different.
Yeah, well, all I can say, I can bring that up to the committee and we can review that in terms of navigability. That's what's in the ordinance. That's what it says. And so if you want, Mr. Bjork, I could bring that to I wouldn't say the next meeting, but maybe one of the meetings in April. I could bring that to the committee and we could review that. But I'm just following what the ordinance says. And yeah,
Right.
it is maybe a little disconnect when you're looking at an intermittent as opposed to something as large as the Red Cedar. But from a zoning standpoint, we try to keep things as black and white as we can, and that doesn't always sit well with the public. But it's our only means of navigating or getting through these ordinances. That this is what it says, and so this is what we regulate to. So if you would like, I could bring that to the committee, and we could have a more detailed discussion at a later meeting.
So Chairman Quinn, would that
Yes.
be possible after we're done with the like manure storage ordinance and the land division ordinance? Could you just revisit it if you would, please?
Absolutely. Let's do that.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary.
We'll put it on my list so that we don't forget that. So thank you, Mr. Bjork.
Any other questions on the planning and zoning division report?
Mr. Chair, if I could.
Yeah.
Just given the question, and I didn't have it on the agenda and for today, and I should have. And I normally, when I have a public hearing at the BOA, I do come back and give a report to the committee. Maybe at the next meeting, it could be a very brief report or expanded discussion just about this piece if you have questions. So I could show you the ordinance and explain that as part of my BOA report to the committee.
I think that would be a good way to handle it. Yeah.
Thank you. And then we can go from there if we need to maybe amend the ordinance in the future.
Yep. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, let's go on then. Solid waste and recycling. Any questions? Okay. Going on to what's next? Land conservation. Anything more on here or anything you want to bring up, Chase?
Yes, I would. Thank you. I just want to draw your attention to the final paragraph there, discussing the manure management ordinance. It was our intention to have a public hearing on March 23rd. I did reach out to all of you to inform you that I've delayed that, but I just wanted to make it known for the record here that for the general public that we have delayed that public hearing to a later date so we can provide more detail and further review of that ordinance draft.
Okay. I think that is a good choice. I think all the committee would agree with that. Any further discussions, any questions? Okay, I think that's the last of the reports. C, targeted runoff management, trim grant participation. Chase?
Yes, thank you. So in this document here regarding TRIM, target runoff management grant participation, I wanted just to bring this to your attention at this meeting with the understanding that at a future meeting, we may discuss this in further detail. But to give you a little bit of a background, we're working with some producers in the O'Galley Township, and part of their I guess issues that down there are related to feed leachate and manure storage structure potentially discharging to surface water. And they're on board, and the farm is on board to pursue corrective actions for some of those concerns and to get into compliance with our ag performance standards and prohibitions that the state has for us. As a part of that, cost share funds are typically necessary to offset the costs that the landowner would be entitled to pay. And right now the farm is partnering with the NRCS, our USDA or federal government partners on cost share, and has reached out to us for cost share assistance. Our annual allocation that we get through Department of Ag, Trade and Consumer Protection would not even come close to the necessary funding for this type of activity, much less consume it entirely for and basically prevent it from being available to other landowners in the county. So TRIM grants, target runoff management grants, are grants through the Department of Natural Resources that are awarded on an annual basis for different types of projects. And this particular project would qualify. We've been in negotiation and consultation with DNR regarding this particular site and are interested in pursuing a TRIM grant for this particular farm to address these resource concerns. With that said, we are still working with the farm to identify the specifics and details of such an application. But in doing so, and upon their I guess desire to pursue this application, I will bring this back before you at a future meeting in order to adopt via resolution our participation in such a grant, as well as participation with this particular farm on a grant. These grant funds can be up to $225,000 depending on the cost associated, and they are 100% reimbursable through the grant process. So likely this application would be is due to be submitted by April 15th for the 2022 and future years. And if the farm proceeds with that and we get that application in on time, these grant funds, if awarded, would be part of our 2022 budget for the county. And again, it is a revenue and expense matching, money in, money out type of activity. So with that, like I said, I just wanted to bring this forward to you. It's my understanding that we have not participated as a county in trim grants of this nature in the past. And it's something that's relatively new for us within our department. And I wanted to make sure we had an understanding of what it is and the reasons why. And if I'd be happy to answer any questions you have right now, but know that we'll look at more details of such an application at probably the next meeting of this committee.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Dan.
Chase, you wrote it and you said it this morning, but just let me clarify, this is potential discharge, not actual leachate discharge?
Well, the way it's currently is there would be leachate discharge from, so what happens is this type of facility is within a shoreline zone. It's within 300 feet of a surface water. And these types of activities that are taking place in those areas do not have any mitigation measures or conservation practices to mitigate discharge to surface water. So while it's like today, it may be leaching or discharging to surface water, but not every day it is from like a feed leachate. So in a rain event, it might discharge, but it's not like a constant stream that's imminent to the stream at this time.
So if it rains tomorrow, it might discharge.
It's potential, correct? Yep. As far as the waste storage facility, the mineral storage structure, this structure was originally constructed in the late 1960s. In around the year 2000, 2002, it was modified to be expanded, and it basically is an earthen lined structure. It has no concrete in it. And just due to time and management of it, it is in somewhat disrepair. So while it's not overtopping, it's not evident at this moment in time of it leaking through the embankment. It does have that potential to potentially be catastrophic if continued without some sort of corrective action.
Mr. Chairman, if I may follow up.
Sure.
So Chase, if this grant is received, what would be the time frame for the mitigation efforts?
Sure. So it's going to depending on the all funding sources. So with EQIP, which is federal NRCS grant funds, they have timetables associated with that as well. We would be looking at immediate corrective actions would be for the construction of new facilities to transfer manure to. So these particular facilities that I'm talking about here with the silage leachate and potentially the existing waste storage facility would likely be about probably 2 years out at a minimum before they would be fully addressed. And we know that going into this to try to understand and mitigate the risk. If this was more urgent, then there would be different measures we would need to take and different activities with DNR we would need to pursue in order to address a more imminent threat. But likely at least a 2-year time frame.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Diane. Is there any other questions? Assuming that there were the status change during the 2-year period, you would have the option of looking at some more immediate emergency type reaction.
Correct. That's correct. As well as if participation and agreement by all parties involved. So let's say equip funds fall through and that there's no funding there, which is a huge dent in the budget for this type of activity. Would the project continue? Or if the farm decided that they did not want to pursue certain activities, we would fall back to our existing manure management ordinance and the authorities granted in there to pursue compliance with some of these issues. So like I said, while they're not imminent right now, we do have the ability and I guess willingness to pursue to make sure we don't just walk away from a site that has such compliance issues.
Thanks. I'm just curious, is the biggest risk catastrophic rainfall to something like this, or is it just an ongoing kind of a?
Yeah, I don't think catastrophic rainfall would be the biggest risk. I think the biggest risk is just a deterioration of the waste storage facility over time. So, keeping an eye on that and practicing the appropriate filling and emptying of such a manure storage structure is probably the most critical.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. Thanks, Chase.
Thank you.
Let's see. I guess that takes care of reports. So we'll move on to 6C. No, 6D, draft and review of draft land division ordinance. Looks familiar, huh? Mr. Carlson.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just when we thought we were done with our draft, we were going to schedule a public hearing in April. I started looking some things over. There's things that keep us all up at night. This ordinance lately has kept me up at night. I don't know. I guess I try and find ways that somebody could skirt the ordinance or something, a loophole, I guess, that we don't have addressed. It's kind of like
unintended consequences.
Yeah, unintended consequences. It's like a boat with a hole in it, and you think, well, I'm going to plug this hole that I see here, and then all of a sudden 3 more holes pop up on the other side of the boat, and eventually end up plugging all the holes, but it takes some time. So I'm not making apologies, but I think I certainly need to provide an explanation this morning to the committee. So last week, of course, the packet went out. Corp Council and I had made some changes that we feel were, slight refinements to our draft that were certainly warranted. After that packet went out, some more things came to light. I ran some more scenarios and realized in a hurry that, okay, this document we have, generally is very, very good. The section that has raised some concerns for me is mainly the whole density concept. It is fairly new for me. Certainly, I'm not going to lie to that or make excuses, and I'm learning as we go. And as I ran some examples, I just thought, you know what, this isn't bulletproof. There's ways around this. There's deficiencies in here. We need some more refinements in this. So what I ended up doing is instead of waiting for public comment, I solicited some comments from one of my peers in a nearby county who's been administering density with respect to land divisions for quite some time. Said, would you please take a look at this draft? Is there anything in here that you'd suggest changing? Basically, soliciting some comments ahead of the public hearing. Why not? We have some time. You've been administering zoning. What has worked well for you? If you had to make some changes, obviously, amendments are going to be done to your ordinance. What are you seeing as amendments coming up? What can we learn from your years of experience with dealing with this? So we had a meeting yesterday, myself, this individual and Corp Council. We've made some, I guess I'll be honest, they're last minute changes, but I just feel that they certainly are worth some discussion this morning. Obviously we wouldn't have brought them before the committee if we didn't feel they were important. So with that preface, I'm just going to go through the cover letter here. So we did make some changes to our draft that was sent out to you in the maximum residential density actually residential is spelled wrong. I apologize for that. Maximum residential density section, as well as the classification of land division section. And then I had provided some sketches in the packet for you, as well as some verbiage here that goes along with those sketches. So I'm going to respectfully this morning ask you to ignore all the sketches I sent out a week ago, because they have been modified. The ink is still drying on the new ones. I did those this morning about 6 o'clock. So I have those in a separate packet here, and without objection from the chair, I would like to open a different document. It's one that we've made some changes to real recently, and I have some new sketches. Would that be okay with Mr. Chair?
Sure.
Okay. So this is a document that you have not seen. Some of what's in this document certainly was in your packet, but some of it is not. So again, I apologize for that. It's just, with timing, getting the packet out, making changes and not delaying this to another meeting and potentially delaying or putting off the public hearing. We just feel these late minute changes are warranted and in the best interest for the committee. So I'm going to go through this. Contiguous tract, okay? This was a change we made. We struck as of the date of the adoption of this ordinance. And when I get into these examples and illustrative sketches, this will make a little more sense, hopefully. But the fact is, once our ordinance is adopted, all the provisions in here become binding and take effect. So we don't need to say as of the date of the adoption of this ordinance at both of these places. Right now, having this in here, more or less hamstrings us, or could hamstring us when we start looking at or evaluating land divisions and specifically density on the contiguous tract as we go forward. So we remove those items. Any question there? It's a minor change, but it does have impact, as we'll see going on. I'm going to move down, and the changes we made are not numerous, but they certainly need some revisiting. So that was the only thing in the definition section. Now we get down to land divisions governed by this chapter. As we started, in most of this discussion this morning, again, is related to density, lot creation and density as it relates to the unzoned townships. So in our previous version, the divisions governed by this chapter, we say where the act of division, conveyance, combination, or reconfiguration creates or describes one or more new lots smaller than 20 acres. That was fine at the time, but now that we're looking at density, okay, I guess it's like this octopus with all these tentacles sticking out. And once you make a change, we've decided to go with density. There are other portions of this ordinance that are affected that didn't come up, I guess, in my mind until I started running some scenarios. So this 20-acre limitation in here is creating some problems. We just feel it's best to take this out. If we're going to apply density, somebody conveys, they've got a large 200-acre piece of land and they want to sell 40 acres off. Having this 20-acre in here is in conflict with that. We want to be able to apply density on that 40-acre parcel that they conveyed. So we feel it's important that this verbiage be struck. Is there any questions on that? And then the same line of thinking goes with item 1B here. We're just going to truncate that at any remnant portion of a contiguous tract. We're getting rid of the 20-acre reference, okay? Because that will take care of itself moving on. In section 16.0 or 16.08, which is our classification of land divisions, we specifically say in there, if you're going to create a new piece of land under 20 acres, a certified survey map is required. So we're not really getting rid of this 20-acre, but having it here could create some unintended consequences, specifically as we apply density. So it's a minor change, but it's important. Moving down, 16.075, this is where the rest of our modifications have taken place. So the maximum density shall be 1 residential parcel per 8 acres. We made some minor changes there just so that reads better. This is something, in our discussion yesterday, we talked about rounding, okay? Right now, we had agreed we were going to round up if it's at least 0.80, because this isn't an exact science, right? Not everybody's going to own 40.00 or 24, basically a number divisible exactly by 8. That's not going to happen. It will, but it's not going to happen in every case. So I don't know, in our discussion, we just decided to put this in for sake of discussion by the committee. We're going to get rid of, this is what we're proposing, get rid of dealing with any type of fractional numbers. No rounding shall be permitted. And this was a suggestion by this other county that's been working with this. I guess in simple terms, we've all been to a county fair, right? I believe there's a standard for getting on, what is it, the tilt-a-whirl. You have to be so many inches in height. Or if you go to the water park at Wisconsin Dells, the Kalahari, you have to be so many inches long to go down the water slide. And this will be the same thing. I mean, if we're going to set up our ratio at 8-to-1, if you come in at 1.95, well, if you're short, you don't get to go down the water slide. In this case, you don't get to divide the property. If your calculation isn't at least 2, it's not going to happen. So, and again, this was something that was brought to our attention that I'm not saying it's an issue in the other county, but it's something that they're considering doing away with if at some point they do amendments to their ordinance. So we made that change here. And I think now would be a good time to have that discussion with the committee. We can certainly leave the verbiage we have, but our recommendation now would be to not permit any type of rounding. It's a 2.5 gives you 2 parcels, 2.9 calculation gives you 2 parcels, 3.1 would give you 3. So is there any discussion or questions or concerns by the committee on this? Any strong opinions one way or the other? Right now, our preference is to have no rounding. And that's the way we would like to move forward unless there's some objection by the committee.
Any comments? I think we're okay, Tom.
Okay.
One comment, say that you had 15.9 acres and you can't round it up. Could you use the center of the highway as additional acres to get up to 16? So you'd be divided twice.
Well, that's a good question. And it all comes down, Gary, to where is your contiguous tract? And we'll go back to your deed. Some highways are fee title ownership. And then of course, the landowner would not have good title to that. Most highways though typically are by easement.
Mm-hmm.
So in that case, the ownership would extend to your deed line. If your deed line happens to run out, let's just say the section line or 40 line and the center line of the road are coincident or one and the same, then your ownership would extend out into the road, but it would be subject by the public's easement over that. So your ownership would be factored into your contiguous tract right off the bat. And it's not this game we would play with the landowner saying, well, you could add some more land. No, you have what you have based on your ownership, and you're either going to own out into the road, or the road right of way it's going to be actually owned in fee title by either the municipality, the state, the county, whoever has jurisdiction over it. So to answer your question, 15.9, if that's what you owned on the data, when the ordinance took effect, and that's all you have right now, we have a provision G, which is just below here. So if you're greater than 8 and smaller than 16, so right now, if you have a 15.9 acre parcel, Gary, and our ordinance gets adopted, say September of this year, you would be allowed to divide that at least once. But if you were deeded 15.9, so now let's say our ordinance gets adopted in September, and then in October, somebody has an 80 acre parcel, a contiguous tract, and they carve out a 15.9 acre piece and deed that to you. They do a certified survey map on it, deed it to you, and you come in a month later and ask me, Tom, I want to divide this now. I'm going to tell you no, because it's very important. When was that parcel created? Was it existing as a contiguous tract when our ordinance took effect? If the answer is yes, then yeah, it falls between 8 and 16, you can divide it. But if the answer is no, it was created subsequent to the adoption of our ordinance, we divide that area by 8. And if the calculation doesn't get me 2.0, you're done. You can't divide it. So this is a big consideration when people are dividing land off. They have to plan for the future. Does that answer your question?
Very good. Thank you, Tom.
You're welcome. Any more questions on item 6 or 2B here?
I have a question, Tom.
Yes.
Excuse me. So these are against residential parcels. So you could conceivably get a 15.9 acre parcel. You could conceivably deed or sell 7 acres to someone as a non-residential parcel, and then you still have retain your residential parcel. Is that correct?
Well, every parcel is going to be considered a residential parcel.
Okay.
So, and we're gonna, maybe let's skip ahead here. We're gonna go, because I hate to hopscotch around, but I think it's important.
Let that go. Let that question go. And keep on going.
With all due respect, I'm going to answer it right now. If we go down to item 3 at the bottom of the page, we are suggesting or recommending that we strike no variance from the requirements of this section shall be granted. In other words, we would allow people to come in and ask for a variance of this section for the reason you're talking about. So let's just say I own 40 acres. My allotment is 5 residential parcels there. I build a house on one and I carve out 4 more and sell those off. I'm done. But I decide that this came up in the past. I want to put up some green bins and I want those to be on their own parcel. So I want to create a new parcel there. Our ordinance says, well, and I want to create a 3 acre parcel to put on 2 green bins. So the ordinance says I have to do a certified survey map. I have to comply with this ordinance. It says that, I have to respect or comply with the density requirements. Well, I can't do that. I'm maxed out. So at that point I would come in, and I think this certainly would address Supervisor Bjork's comment from several meetings ago. I would come in and petition the committee for a variance that, for the reason I want to create a new parcel here on my contiguous tract that no longer has any density requirements. I'm going to do it for non-residential use and make my argument to the committee. And if so, the committee would grant me the variance to create a certified survey map lot there, but I could not build on it. And then I would be placing a restriction on that CSM. Does that answer your question? If I wanted to create a parcel for non-residential use, I would come in and ask for a variance from the requirements of this. If not, every parcel that's created is going to be considered as residential. That's the way this ordinance is set up. There are no exceptions. So anytime you create a parcel, it's going to be given a strike against the contiguous tract. If you don't want that strike to take place, or your strikes are all gone and you still want to do some dividing here, you would have to ask for a variance from the committee. I don't know that this is going to happen, on a regular basis, but it certainly could happen. And by removing item 3 from here, I think we've covered that scenario that would come up. Okay.
So I think Supervisor Bjork's earlier comment was, could you do that if you put a deed restriction on the property? And you're saying that now you can do that, but you have to get an approved variance.
Correct. Deed restrictions, I have my personal opinion on those. I know Corporation Council does. We've talked about this in the past, and we just feel asking for a variance from the committee has more value than placing a deed restriction on a parcel. That deed restriction is, in perpetuity. Who has the right to release it? What is the validity of it going down the road? It certainly encumbers that property. It shows up in the chain of title. And I just think my personal opinion is if we can avoid placing deed restrictions on the property, that has value if we can do it in a different fashion.
Okay, I agree with that. Other questions on here? Yes, Mike.
Mr. Chair. Yeah, I did have a question question on actually what a residential parcel is, and you've kind of answered it. Now, you used an example just now that Gary had brought up about putting grain bins on. What if I've used up all my quota and I want to sell 3 acres to a business that can be built in that particular zone? Could that be done with that?
My initial response, I believe, would be yes. You would have to certainly, depending on the size of that parcel, let's say it's 3 acres, it would require a certified survey map. It would need a variance by the committee because it technically wouldn't be allowed to be created. So a variance would have to be granted, and there would have to be a restriction placed on the face of that CSM that, this CSM, and again, we're not talking zoning here because, again, this whole section would only apply to the unzoned towns. So zoning wouldn't even factor in here. So again, we're in the town of New Haven, for instance. I think that would be permissible. That's my opinion, just not having much time to think about it here.
And if variances could be granted, which I think is a good idea, a parcel could continue to be broken up maybe into related businesses if the committee decided that they wanted that.
Perhaps, yes, I believe so. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And now you said that every parcel created is considered a residential parcel. Is that correct?
Correct. And I'll be getting into some examples here. And then at that time, if there's more questions, I certainly anticipate questions. That may be the appropriate time we deal with some of this. Because I have scenarios set up, but that doesn't mean we can't change them on the fly as we go. So feel free to interject when we get to that portion. That'll be coming up very soon here. So if there's no more questions on 2B, I'm going to move down to 2D. We are striking that. That has the reference to the deed restriction in there. We don't feel it's necessary if we're removing item 3. We're going to allow for a variance. So item 2D is not necessary. I won't say it's not necessary. I'm just going to say there is another option to address 2D, and that's through a variance. And then 2E, we're getting rid of that whole thing. We initially thought it was a good idea that this requirement shall not apply to the remnant, but as I started looking at different scenarios, it doesn't work. Our own ordinance conflicts with itself, and that's never a good thing. So 2E is being removed, and then item F in our mind is not even needed, right? I mean, up above, we're saying that here's how you figure out your density. You take your area, divide by 8. Why do we need to say again that? I guess item F was mainly put in here, in my opinion, as an added emphasis, okay, to let everybody know, hey, if you don't have 8 acres, you can't divide it. Well, item 2B up above says the same thing. So we just felt item F can be removed. And then we are leaving item G in there. We just feel that, the committee certainly had some discussion on this and see value in that. So if it's between 8 and 16, but again, this is on the date of the adoption, the day our ordinance took place. You can't come in and carve a 12-acre piece off down the road and now use this provision. That's not what this is for. And I think we all understand that. I hope we do. It's clear in my mind anyway. If it's not in yours, then, please speak up, or when we get in these examples. So, and then another thing we added, we want this ordinance to be user-friendly, right? Not only for staff myself mainly that has to administer this, but also the surveyors that are working in this county that are going to be bound by this, advising their clients, developers that may own land or think about purchasing land in this county, and landowners in general. We want this to be a good document that's easily understandable. We don't want to create confusion, and we don't want to create a hardship for somebody. So after discussing things, one thing that certainly is going to come up, this density, runs with the land. And just because I close next week on a piece of land that's 24 acres, doesn't guarantee that I'm going to get 3 splits out of there. If it came out of a larger contiguous tract and all the density is used up, I certainly could end up with a 24-acre parcel that I can't divide for residential purposes. And it's inevitable. It's going to happen at some point down the road. And I feel for those people that buy land, but on the other side of the coin, it's their responsibility. It's their realtor's responsibility, the surveyor's responsibility that may be working for them to research the parcel and apply the ordinance. So we added this section this morning, actually. It's item X right now, but certainly will be lettered appropriately. It is recommended prior to any division or conveyance affected by this section, the owner, applicant, or developer contact the county surveyor's office for maximum allowable residential density on the contiguous tract. So what that's saying is, before you buy a piece of land, or if you own a piece of land, before you divide it, you really need to come in and sit down with myself so we can go through your parcel. How long, when was it created? What is the contiguous tract it came out of on the date of the adoption? How much density, if any, is left before you make any financial decisions on this? Now, is this going to be a catch-all? No, it's not. People don't read ordinances. Some do, some don't. Some read an ordinance, some don't understand it. But at least having this in here gives me a little more peace of mind that, okay, we tried to make the public aware that you really need to come in and have a consultation. It's in your best interest. So I think having this provision in here certainly can't hurt, and hopefully it'll help in a lot of situations. So yes.
I think that is an excellent idea, but how do we get the public to come in the first place? That'd be the biggest challenge, just to familiarize what's going on. Because like we have a halfway idea of what is in this ordinance, but the general public, I would think, has very little knowledge of it.
Well, and again, we're publishing a notice in the paper. We're holding a public hearing. I know not everybody reads the paper or takes interest, or some people will see it and think, well, this doesn't apply to me. And we can't force this down everybody's throat. I mean, we're complying with the law. We're holding a public hearing. I guess my hope is that, that certainly the towns are gonna be aware of this and possibly convey this information to their constituents. I know I get a newsletter, the town that I'm in, perhaps the towns can, place a blurb in their monthly newsletter to their constituents that there are changes to the land division ordinance. I don't know how I can reach every constituent in the county other than, we're holding a public hearing, the towns are notified. I don't know if that's answering your question, Gary. It's, some of this honestly is back on the public too. It's buyer beware. You have to be aware of the ordinances that are in place. I guess if I travel over to Minnesota to go fishing on a lake over there, it's my responsibility to know what the regulations are on that lake. And if I don't know what they are, then I better get the rule book and figure it out. And if I do something illegal or in violation of their law over there, I can't claim ignorance. It's my responsibility. And I know that may sound harsh, but I don't know how else to handle it. People have to be aware that we have adopted a new ordinance and there are provisions in here that are going to affect them.
Mr. Chairman.
And
So Tom, I'm wondering, I guess picking up on Supervisor Bjork, would it be possible in the public hearing to extend a particular invitation to, as you put it, realtors and surveyors who would have some responsibility for passing this information on?
Certainly. And you may remember we did have a public hearing scheduled for December 22nd that we had to, pull back or cancel.
Right.
And in anticipation of that hearing, I did send an email out to all the surveyors that work in the county, even though, you know, it was publicly noticed in the paper, I sent them a separate notification. You know, you are professionals that are going to be working with this ordinance,
Right.
and I invited them to come to the hearing. I certainly could extend that to, you know, the title companies that
Sure.
serve the area, the realtors. There may be others that, yeah, and that, you know, getting a bunch of emails may be a little bit of work, but that's something I certainly could tackle. And your point is well taken. The more people we can notify, just simply
Right.
complying with state law and the public notice requirement is one thing. It doesn't mean we can't go above and beyond and provide notice to others. So that your point is very well taken, and I certainly can do that. Yes.
Well, and it certainly seems that at surveyors and realtors would be critical. You depend on your workload to decide how far beyond that you want to extend,
Mhm.
additional invitations. But it just seems like that's a way to get the information out and address Supervisor Bjork's concerns, and I guess all of ours.
And they are valid concerns, and both of you supervisors make very good points, and I will certainly take your recommendation on that.
Tom, one more question, please.
Yes, sir.
Have you brought this up at any towns association quarterly meetings?
Actually, I was invited. I don't remember the date, but I was invited to one of the section meetings. I don't know if I'm using the right term here, but the last Wisconsin Towns Association that was held where Dunn County participated, I was invited by Cheryl Miller to give a brief overview. I believe it was about a 20-minute, half-hour presentation, I want to say. Oh, that was probably a month and a half ago now, something like that.
Okay.
And I don't know if Chair Quinn, if you were at that, if you remember being, okay. Well, it was a little while ago, and of course, now we've made some changes to the ordinance since then, but generally what was presented at that Towns Association meeting was very close to what we have in front of us right now. Obviously, some changes have been made, but so to answer your question, yes, I did give a presentation at the Towns Association. And then also the heat group, the Healthy Environmental Action Team for Dunn County, I gave a presentation to them. That was even before the Wisconsin Towns Association. So again.
So it sounds like, Tom, that we're doing our best that we can to inform the public. I don't know how much more we can do. Really.
Yeah, there's always going to be, individuals that claim they didn't know about this, and it's going to happen. Again, reach every person that lives in this county, or even people outside the county, land speculators that might be looking at purchasing land. It's I think a tall task to notify everybody. We can do the best we can, and with your suggestions, I think we certainly reach more people than we would just with a public notice. But again, people are going to divide property off that doesn't require a survey. They're not going to talk to a surveyor. If they call my office, certainly I will inform them of what they need to do. But a lot of people, I won't say a lot, but some people choose to do things on their own. They write their own deeds. They don't hire a title company or an attorney, and they get themselves in trouble over time. So that's going to happen, and we'll have to deal with that as things come up. But I just think having item X in here as it's worded now, I'm not going to say relieves the county of any, liability or responsibility, or I don't know if you even want to use those words, but I think it has value that we can point to that and say, well, you did this. Our ordinance says it was recommended you come in and talk to us. Had you done that, we could have, ended up at a different outcome for you. But again, this language certainly isn't going to hurt, and I think it has extreme value, so it's worth keeping in here. Any other questions or concerns?
Mr. Chairman.
Supervisor Anderson.
Thank you. Tom, thank you very much. As you were reporting this, and I'm thinking I'm the rookie here, and what I do is mostly learn, but Chairman Quinn and I are both on the executive board of the county board, and it occurred to me that the best thing I do when I hear from anybody is I know who to refer them to. I do not know, nor do I pretend to, all these things, but I do know that if I can forward or put them in contact with you or the right person, I've done my job. So what I'm saying is, Chairman Quinn, I think you and I should probably bring this up on your announcements at our executive board, and somehow with our entire county board, if they will do the same thing, not have to know, but know who to refer them to. And X, as you said, Tom, is great. I love that section in there. So we can get people to contact your office, Tom, before they do anything. And then if a county board supervisor hears anything later, they will at least know who that we're in this together. That's part of our leadership role. Thank you, Chairman Quinn.
Thank you. Good point. Any other questions? Okay, Tom, let's go on.
Hearing none, then we did also make a minor modification to section 16.08. And this came from a comment I received by email from a member of the public that in their mind was confusing. And I guess we concede, we agree. It's section 16.08 sub 1, our minor subdivision classification. So we talk about creation of a lot smaller than 20 acres from a contiguous tract requires a CSM. A maximum of 5 lots smaller than 20 acres may be created within a contiguous tract in a 5-year period. Additional lots must be created by county plat or state plat. And what was creating confusion was this sentence was being construed that, well, okay, let's just say I'm bound by a density calculation. I own 40 acres. I'm in an unzoned township. I'm in Rock Creek Township. I've got 40 acres. I'm allowed 5 splits. This provision, somebody was construing to mean that, well, I could do 10 lots on my 40 if I did a county plat or a state plat, and I could do more than what the density was allowing me. And that's certainly not what this provision means. What this provision means is if I'm allowed, say, 10 splits on my contiguous tract and I want to do them all at once, I can do 5 in the first 5-year period. But if I want to do them all in the first 5-year period, then the remaining 15, let's just say I want to do 15, the remaining 10 I could do in that first 5 years, but I would be bound to create them by a county plat or a state plat. So we just thought, let's just strike the whole sentence. That way it takes any confusion out of here. Somebody can't come back and say, well, I'm going to do a county plat and do all my lots right now and do more lots than what the density would allow. So because this takes care of itself once we get down in the, the county plat and state plat section here. So just removing it, I think it clarifies or doesn't provide hidden meaning that's not there under sub 1. So any questions on that? Just a minor change, but it may reduce some phone calls in the future.
I think that does clarify it. It was confusing.
Yeah. I mean, it's clear to me, but I can see where somebody would take a different meaning from it. So, if that's out there and that could happen, let's just remove it and not give them an opportunity to take a different meaning from it. So that concludes the changes we've made. So if there's no questions on those changes, I'm going to jump into some sketches here. And we've all looked at sketches, and I just think, sketch is worth 1,000 words here. So bear with me 1 second. So I've got some notes here. And again, these sketches now were not in your packet. Okay. So again, I apologize for that, but we just thought we'll get it to the committee today instead of delaying this another 2 weeks. So sketch A. So again, the presumption here is we're in an unzoned township. So all these sketches again are going to relate to the density section 16.075, the new section we created. So our ordinance is adopted. Smith has 40 acres, Jones has 40 acres. So their contiguous tracts are each 40 acres. Under the density calculation, they can each do create 5 parcels out of their 40, okay? And the presumption is they're going to be for residential, unless they come in and ask for some type of a variance, which we talked about before. So this is something that cropped up last week. We have these conveyances of land between adjoiners. How do we handle this? This is a very common situation. So Smith and Jones, neither one of them, a year goes by after the ordinance is adopted, neither one of them have done any dividing. And Smith decides, well, I'm going to deed the west 16 acres of my 40 to Jones. So he does that. They record a warranty deed and things are done. So Smith is left with 24 acres. Jones now has 56 acres. They're contiguous. One contiguous tract got enlarged, the other one got reduced. So one is getting bigger, one's getting smaller. Collectively, between the two of them, they still have 80 acres. Okay, and that's important. So our tracts have to be allowed. Well, they don't have to, but our preference is for the tracts, contiguous tract, to increase or decrease over time, which is why, remember, our first discussion of this morning was our definition of contiguous tract. We took out as of the adoption of the date of the ordinance. By having that in there, that doesn't allow these tracts to grow or shrink. So I'm going back around full circle here to show how that change we made in the definition affects a real world example here. So now Jones has a 56 acre contiguous tract. Smith has 24. Okay, so we're going to jump into sketch B. So well, that was one example. This is another example before we move on. So Smith and Jones each had 48. So we're just going to take a step back here. Smith and Jones had 40 acres on the date of the adoption of the ordinance. So they each get 5 splits. But prior to Smith deeding the 16 acres to Jones, he creates 3 1-acre CSM lots up in the northeast corner of his 40. Okay, so forget about the dashed blue lines for right now. Smith has his 40 acres. He hires a surveyor, says, I want to create 3 1-acre lots up in the northeast corner. He does that. His remaining, so we take 3 acres off of there's 37 acres that remains, is also a parcel. So he created 4 parcels there, 3 that he intends to sell off and 1 that he's keeping. So he's got 4 parcels there. So after he does that, a few weeks later, Jones approaches him and says, I want to buy the west 16 acres of your property. So he says, sure, I'll sell that to you. So he deeds that over to Jones. Okay. Jones typically would realize 2 splits, right? 16 acres divided by 8 gets him 2. But the splits are not there because Smith already used up some of those, right? So, and this is where the tracking becomes important. This is the administrative portion that I'm going to have to oversee on my end with respect to land divisions and unzoned townships where density requirements are in place. So Smith again has 4, he's created 4 parcels. He then decides to deed 16 acres to Smith. Well, Smith typically would get 2 splits there, but he only gets 1 because, he doesn't get the 2 splits. There aren't 2 available. There's only 1 left on the land that it was coming from. So now Jones has a 56 acre contiguous tract. That doesn't change. His contiguous tract is still 56 acres. And he can do 5 splits on his original 40 that he had, and he realizes 1 more on the 16 that he purchased from Smith. Okay. So in the grand scheme of things, Smith puts 4 houses on his piece and Jones can put 6 on his. We end up with no more, no less. We get 10 residential parcels on the original 80 that was owned, collectively between the 2 of them. Does everybody understand that? Because this is very important. And this is where when Jones comes in my office and says, well, I just bought 16 acres. I want to put 2 more, I want to split it here. I want to put 2 residences out there. And I say, well, okay, in theory, that's what we would allow, but I need to do some research. I need to figure out, on the date of the adoption, who owned what has happened over time. And then I would have to call Jones and say, well, I'm really sorry, Mrs. Jones, but you can't divide this property because the prior action by Smith took up the density and you're not allowed to do this. You can put 1 house on there, but you can't put 2. Does that make sense to everybody? This is a tracking exercise that I'm gonna have to go through. I mean, I'm not opposed to it. Go ahead.
Okay, so there's gonna be 10 total, just like there would have been.
Mhm.
Jones gets to do 6. Could they put all 6 of them on that 16 acres?
Sure, because that's his contiguous
Okay.
tract. It grew over time. And that's
I
a
just wanted to
very,
make sure.
that's an extremely important point that you brought up, because this goes back to our clustering principle, right? Jones maybe doesn't want to, he wants to max out his houses, but he really wants to continue row cropping the ag land he has over there. And this would allow him to put those residences all on the 16 acres that he bought, as long as they're somewhere within the boundary of his contiguous tract, which grew and expanded over time. Okay.
Question, Tom?
Yes, Supervisor Bjork.
Is there any way we can make this more easier to keep track of the splits? I mean, instead of doing a total title search every time, is there any way possible that we could have this calculation more readily available without a full title search?
I don't believe so. No, I've looked into this. I've talked with our land information officer with respect to, the tax records and the parcel mapping, and the Dunn County is able to create a snapshot in time. So once our ordinance goes into effect, it's adopted August 1st. We are going to get a snapshot in time of the ownership in the county that I'm going to be able to refer to and go back and look at, a year after the ordinance is adopted, 11, 12, 13, 17 years after the ordinance is adopted. I'm going to be able to go back to that snapshot and see that in this case, Jones owned 40 acres and Smith owned 40. And what has happened over time. I don't know how else to do it unless we had some type of a relational database, and somebody would have to go in and program all the allowable splits when the ordinance was adopted, and then keep track of every conveyance that happened over time. I think it would generate full-time work maybe for several people. I don't know. Again, this is only applicable in the unzoned towns. This isn't county-wide. So, not every land division that comes through is going to have to come across my desk and require some research. I honestly don't foresee this being a huge problem on my end. If it becomes a problem, I can certainly let the committee know and maybe suggest alternate ways of doing this as we get rolling. But to answer your question, Supervisor Bjork, I don't know of a better way to do this. That's not saying there isn't one, but it hasn't come to my attention at this point.
Thank you.
Can I follow up on Gary's question, Mr. Chair?
Sure.
Well, Tom, in the zone townships, aren't they already keeping track of this because it's density based?
Correct.
I mean, just for so they're already having this problem or doing this, and isn't this exactly the same thing they're doing in the zone townships?
Correct. They're keeping track of number of splits. Mm-hmm. And they're doing. I don't want to speak for Bob, but they are doing that in house, I believe.
Okay, and what you're explaining to us now matches the zoning ordinance.
It doesn't match it exactly as far as how the density is applied going forward. And again, I would certainly welcome, Bob to chime in on this if he's with us, but the way we're looking at density going forward is it runs with the land and it's a calculation. So if I sell land off, I apply the density going forward. So it's equitable for everybody. I guess in my mind, we don't want this to be a hoarding, if you will, of density credits. I mean, if I'm going to sell off 16 acres, we do the calculation, it gets 2 splits. The other option is to, keep the density credit. So then I would have to record some type of a document at the Register of Deeds, perhaps another deed restriction saying this, this. And again, I really want to get away from flooding the Register of Deeds office with deed restrictions and creating potential title problems for people down the road. So to answer your question, no, we aren't administering this exactly like the zoning office is. That's my understanding. It's a simple calculation. We keep applying the 8-to-1 ratio on all future divisions and conveyances.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I could just chime in, please.
Sure.
I think it's important to realize that, Tom's ordinance is for creating parcels, and zoning is there, to regulate the use. And so we do track land splits, and we are responsible for maintaining the density of those parcels. And what our ordinance says, and it's a little different than Tom's, and so Tom is correct that he doesn't follow ours exactly. In zoning, we track density against the parent tract. Whatever parcels existed at the time that the ordinance was adopted, that's your parent tract, and then we calculate density based off of that. And so there's a little bit of difference, but they can't be exactly the same, because Tom's process is for creating a parcel and ours is a process for regulating the uses, in this case density on those parcels. So I don't know if that really answers your question, Mr. Kinnear.
Yes, it does. You both have to keep track of it, and you're able to do it, and Tom says he'll be able to do it. And
Yes.
good. Thank you.
Well, I know we can. I assume Tom will be able to.
I am 100% confident. Yes. Okay, if there's no more questions, and we can come back to these sketches. I have 4 more sketches to get through here.
Sure.
So I'm going to move on. So sketch C, and these are all relatively the same, but they have different implications. So again, sketch C, Smith and Jones each have 40 acres. In this case, Smith creates 4 new lots, okay, before he deeds over to Jones. So he's got 1, 2, 3, and 4. He sells those off to somebody. The remaining acreage here, I'll do the math quick. So he's got 36 acres left here. He deeded off 4 1-acre CSM lots. He's got 36 acres in here. Smith decides he's going to buy 16 acres, or Jones decides to buy 16 acres from Smith. Smith agrees, deeds it over to him. And then Jones comes in my office and says, well, I just picked up 2 more splits. I say, well, yeah, you probably did. Let me do a little research. I go back to when these were created, find out that Smith gets 5. Well, he's maxed out. So he was maxed out at the time he deeded the land over to Jones. So I have to call Mr. Jones and say, well, you purchased 16 acres, but it doesn't come with any residential splits on it. So, you still own the land, you can hunt on it, you can sell it to somebody, but you don't realize another split on there. You can still do 5 splits. We're not taking those away. Those aren't affected. Your original allotment of 5 is still yours. You can put those anywhere on. So your contiguous tract grew. You now have 56 acres, and you can put your 5 splits wherever you want on that 56 acres, but you're not going to realize 2 more or 1 more. You're realizing no more splits because Smith had already exhausted those before he deeded you the land. So it becomes very important, in tracking when did the splits happen in relation to subsequent land conveyances. This all makes really good sense in my mind after the discussion we had yesterday. I'm the one that's going to have to administer this. I want something that is going to make sense, not only for me, but also for people going down the road and in the future. So this is sketch C. I'm going to just keep moving here, and we can certainly come back to these. So here's sketch D. So same scenario. We each have 40 acres. I carved off 2 lots up in the corner here, and I kept 38 acres for myself. Then I decided to deed to Jones. Jones gets his full allotment in this case because I've used up 3 here. the 2 that normally would be attributed to the 16 acre, 16 divided by 8 calculation is 2. It's important to remember the calculation going forward gives me a number, but it is subject to the prior divisions. So just because the math may work out to a certain number doesn't necessarily mean in all instances that I'm entitled to that. Okay, that's something a very important concept we need to keep in mind going forward. So in this case, Jones would end up with a 56 acre contiguous tract, and he would be allowed 7 splits on there. 5 from his original 40 and 2 from the 16 that he picked up. Mr. Smith is done. He can't come in and further divide this, at least for residential purposes. So now I'm going to expand on this. So Mr. Smith wants to create, he does maple syrup, okay? He wants to put a maple syrup business in down here, or put an evaporator in, and, you know, a couple small outbuildings. And he wants to do that on a 3 acre parcel where my hand is down here in the southeast corner. So he calls me up and says, well, I want to create a 3 acre parcel here. I let him know that, well, you can't do that because our ordinance says that, you know, these parcels are for residential. But I inform him that you certainly can apply for a variance from our ordinance, put together your argument and come in with it. We'll take it to the committee. So he comes in before the committee and says, you know what, my density allotment here is all used up. I'm not going to create this parcel for residential purpose. I want to put a maple syrup operation on here. Will you allow me to create this split? Even though my density is used up, and I'm going to certify I'm not going to be using this for residential purpose. The committee, here's his argument. They either deny it or they grant it. So let's say the committee grants his variance request. He hires a surveyor. They create a certified survey map here, and we're done. We move on. It was allowed through a variance. Okay. He didn't have to deed restrict it to non-residential use. It makes for a nice, clean chain of title going down the road. It doesn't encumber the property. I guess that's the word I'm looking for. The property is not encumbered by a deed restriction, and it allows him to use it for the intended purpose. Does that make sense to everybody?
Couple of comments, Tom,
Yes.
on that. How do you know where the splits will stay? If that, Smith, does he have to have some kind of deed restriction if he wants to keep all the splits? Or does it automatically go to Jones because he bought the 16 acres?
No, we are getting away from deed restrictions.
Okay.
And not even having that as a provision. We've stricken that.
Okay.
So it's important to remember the splits go with the property, not with the owner. So
Okay.
they go with the property if there are any attributable to the property. In some cases, the full number of splits based on the calculation go with the conveyance. In other cases, just the land got conveyed. The splits don't go along because they've already been used up. If I
So
go back.
the other comment then, Tom, is that these splits will have value. So a piece of parcel, the same piece might have like different value if it's got splits available or not. So we're kind of creating value in a sense, right?
Yeah, if you look at it that way, but what's valuable to one person may not, if I'm a developer and I look at a 28 acre piece of land that has no development potential, I'm going to say that piece is worthless to me. But if I'm a deer hunter, I might place really high value on that 28 acres. So, I mean, it's relative, but yes, in some people's eyes, depending who you are, it could, I don't want to use the word devalue the property because I don't want to talk that way, but it may have less value to somebody based on their potential use of the property in the future. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So this was sketch D. Now we're going to jump into sketch E. So Smith and Jones, this dashed line over here was the original contiguous tract division line, if you will, between the two. Jones had 40 over here. Smith had 40. Let me grab my notes here. Smith creates 2 lots up here and keeps the third one. He ends up deeding the west 16 acres over to Jones. So Jones has 56 acres. Smith sold these 2 acres off, 2 lots off, 1 acre apiece. He has 22 acres left. Smith is done. He can't do any further dividing over here. But Jones now has a 56 acre contiguous tract. He picked up 2 more splits, okay, because Smith had 5, he used 3, 2 went with the conveyance to Jones. So Jones now has 7 splits on his 56 acres. So he decides he's going to create 2 2-acre lots up here in the woods. Then he decides to sell 16 acres over here to Williams, okay? So everything is still fine. Jones still has some splits available to him. He has 7, so he used up 2, plus what he's keeping here is 3, and then he split this one off, so that's 4 splits. He still has some splits available to him. So then down the road, Williams decides, well, he's got 16 acres here. He doesn't have to split that if he doesn't want, but if he wants to create, say, a 10 acre and a 6 acre lot, he can do that because Jones hasn't, taken up all the splits here yet. He's only done 2 parcels over here. So Williams can make 2 lots over here. He makes a 10 acre and a 6 acre. He could have made a 1 acre and a 15 acre. It doesn't matter as long as each one is at least an acre in size. So now Williams, he's allowed to create a maximum of 2 residential parcels. So he does that. The splits go with the land. Again, he may never split it, but those splits went with the land and they were lost by, Jones does not retain those. So if Williams never splits his land, Jones doesn't retain those splits. Those splits went to Williams. So Jones can still create 3 residential parcels on his contiguous tract, okay? He had 7. He can create 3 more because 4 of them are already split off. He did 2 and then Williams did 2. And end result is we're left with 10 potential residences on this 80 acres collectively. So that's how this works going forward. And it all works out, but it does, I'm not going to say it gets complicated, but it has the potential to get complicated down the road if we have large parcels that have been split up numerous times. And that's going to happen. And that's on me to track this and advise people on what they can do. And again, this would be in the unzoned townships, 6 of our townships. So I know there's probably more questions, now's the time to ask, but this is what we're proposing going forward. And the language changes that we went through earlier in this meeting allow us to provide the interpretation on these sketches that I just went through. And the end result is to apply density to the land, right? That's what this whole exercise is about, and this whole provision in the ordinance. We've set our density ratio at 8:1. So collectively on this 80 acres, which was originally owned by 2 parties that each could have done 5 residential splits, we're going to end up with no more than 10 on here. The math works out. So the splits go with the land.
So Tom, in this, go ahead, Mike.
So basically, the committee has decided to go with density. And in a way, that's our concept. We're going with that. So as long as we know that you can administer it, all this is left to you. And we're deciding more on the concept, and you've shown us how it's going to work. That's the way I see it. Thank you.
Mr. Supervisor Bartlett.
On an on-zone township with this concept, that density concept, and I'm thinking of like Springbrook, actually, because seems to be a lot of building in that area. Unlike a zone township, where if you want to have more density, you can ask to be rezoned, there's no way in an on-zone township to ever do more than the splits that are available. I mean, there's no way to go to Board of Adjustment or to ask for a variance for a residence. It's that amount of density, period, correct?
Correct.
So
Well,
if like Springbrook Township, the only way they would change it is they would have to become zoned.
Correct. Even if their own ordinance allowed for so many splits over time on a 40, or, you know, they adopted something that was, you know, much more liberal than what we have, the developer would still have to comply with the more restrictive ordinance. And at that point, it would be the county's ordinance. The town may allow for, you know, 24 lots on a 40, but the county's ordinance is more restrictive, and they would have to comply. The developer, landowner, would have to comply with the more restrictive ordinance requirements. And
So
yes,
what we're doing in some instances, especially, you know, like Springbrook, where there is seems to be a fair amount of building, we're putting a road block up for housing. It seems to me. I understand all the good things, but I'm also looking at what's going to happen in a non-zone township. Is it's that density, period. There's no other way to do it. Just a comment. Thank you.
yes, and if I could just expand on my response, if we are taking out the variance, no allowance for a variance out of section 16.075, I suppose, and maybe this is a question for council, but I suppose a landowner could come in and ask for, so they've maxed out their density. Smith, in this example, he's done. He's got his 3 parcels on 24 acres. He wants to put in another residential parcel. I don't, you know, what would preclude him, I guess, from coming in requesting a variance to create another parcel there? Of course, you'd have to make a really good argument. And I guess my counter argument would be as well, it's not consistent with the provisions of our ordinance. Our ordinance is in place to, you know, regulate land development, and we have a standard in here. And at that point, I think my recommendation certainly would be to not, you know, to deny the variance request because it's not consistent with our ordinance. So I think that's possibly an option. They could request a variance, but I don't know that our committee would want to grant that variance on obvious grounds. So yeah, they certainly can't rezone the property to a different district that they could if they were in a zone township, get into a residential district where there is no density requirement. Mm-hmm.
Tom?
Go ahead, Supervisor Guerrero.
Just so I understand Mr. Bartlett's comment, so on an unzoned township, they cannot apply for a state plat or a county plat? Plat. Is that correct?
Nope, that is incorrect. So a county plat or a state plat doesn't allow them to create more lots. Now we're talking an unzoned township.
Right.
So what I'm saying here is only applicable to the unzoned towns for this discussion. So
Okay.
if I'm in an unzoned town and I have 40 acres, I'm allowed 5 splits in there. And according to our provision in our ordinance, they can do those all within the first 5 years. In the past, we said 4 lots per 40 in a 5 year. Now we're changing that to 5. So on my 40 acres, I can do 5 splits. I can do them all right now on year 1. Let's just say I own 80 acres. So the math calculation would get me 10 splits out there. I can put 10 houses on there. If I want to do those all right now, Gary,
Okay.
our ordinance says I can do that. 5 of those, though, could be done with a certified survey map. The other 5, I can't use a CSM because I'm limited to 5 in a 5-year period. So if I want to do all 10, those were given. I mean, those were allotted to me because I had enough land to begin with. I was allotted 10 splits. If I want to do all 10 right now, I can do a plat on all 10 of those, or I can do a CSM on the first 5, but then the second 5, the last 5, 6 through 10, I'm going to be required to do either a county plat or a state plat based on how large my lots are.
So what
Okay?
you're saying then is a plat does not give you any more like splits for residential, it just moves up the time frame.
It allows me to do them in a quicker period if in fact I have the right to do those. It doesn't expand my number of splits. No.
Okay. Thank you very much for helping me explain that to me.
You're welcome. And it can be confusing. I deal with this all the time, and people that don't, it's can be a difficult concept to grasp. Certainly.
A follow-up on Chairman Bartlett's. If a township that is unzoned is experiencing growth, like he mentioned, they do have an option of saying, well, things are changing, we should go to county zoning. They also have an option, I believe, you can correct me, Bob, they can actually do zoning for their own township if they want to administer it. So that would be an option, I think. So they do have a little bit of options, especially if there's a bunch of change, maybe something they would need to do anyway.
Any other questions? Really good comments. Good. I have one question, Tom. Could you explain, just to sort of go through how what's this process through which these splits come to your attention?
Well, it's typically when a landowner comes in, or most cases it's a surveyor, but not always. A surveyor calls me up because somebody contacted them. They know they have to hire a surveyor. So a lot of times they'll call my office and say, I want to divide some land. What do I have to do? So many people think I can do it. The county's going to come out and carve out these parcels, draw the map up, pay all the fees. That doesn't happen. But a lot of times they get in the yellow pages and call up, surveyor X, and they say, this is what I want to do. Then the surveyor calls me and says, all right, I have a client. This is what they're planning on doing. Do you see any problems? That's usually how this works. And then I sit down, I go through things. I want to stress the word usually, because it's usually how it works, but not always. Sometimes, a surveyor will submit a project without talking to me and then find out, well, geez, I got $1,200 stuck in this, and you're telling me my client can't do this. And that's unfortunate. And we get larger parcels that don't need a survey, that maybe a realtor or a title company is telling their customer or their client that, well, you can do this. We'll draw up the deed, we'll record it, and then we find out after the fact that a violation took place. But so it's mainly things that come across my desk.
Okay.
And that's part of my job, administering the ordinance, advising people on land division issues. So it is going to be a change. I'm not going to use the word substantial, but it is going to be a change from how I'm currently doing business. But I'm certainly up for it. I think it's a good principle moving forward, and the committee has expressed interest in moving this route. And I want to assure the committee that, this is going to be administered properly under my direction. I'm up for the challenge. I guess I don't see it as a challenge. It's just an additional thing I'm going to be required to do.
Okay. Any other comments right now? So Tom, you're thinking that this would be ripe for a public hearing when?
At this point, we're comfortable with this verbiage going to a public hearing, and at our last meeting, we decided that would happen at the first PR&D meeting in April. So that's April 13th. It requires a Class 2 notice. So to meet the notice requirements for the April 13th meeting, it would have to be published in the Dunn County News on Wednesday, March 24th and Wednesday, March 31st. Wednesday, April 7th would not qualify because that is not at least 1 week before the action is being taken. So I would have to make sure this gets noticed on March 24th and March 31st, which I certainly have ample time to get that done. So right now, the recommendation would be to hold a public hearing at 8:30 in the morning on Tuesday, April 13th, before this committee.
Okay. Anybody on the committee have a problem with that? Go ahead and get public input, see where we're at. Okay. I really think that you've done a good job of making this much more easy to understand, and I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I just want to tell Tom that he needn't get up at 6 o'clock in the morning to make more changes, because you've really done a good job on this. And I think I speak for all of us when I say how much I appreciate all the work you've put into this.
Thank you. That means a lot. And again, we had this meeting here and this wasn't on the agenda. And I thought, you know what, why not? We're foolish not to take advantage of another meeting to make some minor changes here. So thanks again for your understanding and your patience. That's the key word here. I think patience moving through this whole project. It's a large project and we want it right. We want it right.
Yeah.
Well done.
Absolutely.
I echo that. Well done.
Thank you. And just thanks again. I want to publicly thank Nick because he's been very patient with me as well. There's other things he has on his plate and I do as well. So lately he's been dropping things at a moment's notice to accommodate all these changes. So I just want Nick to know that, you know, all his efforts are certainly appreciated.
You're here. Agreed. Okay. I think we've had a good discussion here. Let's move on. Item 8 is a resolution authorizing participation in the 21-22 Snowmobile Recreational Trails Grant Program. It's Chase.
Yep. Hi, everyone again. In the packet, you should have seen a resolution regarding our participation in our Snowmobile Trail and Recreational Trail Grant Program through the Department of Natural Resources. This is my understanding and past experience has been an annual resolution that comes before this committee to authorize participation in these programs, which basically allows us to apply for the grants, receive the money, distribute the funds to the appropriate snowmobile clubs and other associated activities such as bridge maintenance and bridge replacement. So this is basically an annual resolution that's before you right now, and will get us prepared to continue to apply for those grant programs in the future.
Thanks, Chase. Is there a motion from the committee to authorize?
Question, Chase, on that. I thought before that we could take a little of the application fee out of that grant, like for our work at the county. Is that correct?
That is correct. There is a portion of this that we can use for administrative purposes. I can't speak to the specific sum or the amount of that right now, but that is correct that we will continue to pursue that if, where those opportunities are available.
Thank you.
Anyone care to make a motion to approve?
Mr. Chairman, I will move approval of this resolution authorizing our participation in the 21-22 Snowmobile Trails Grant Program.
Supervisor Morehouse moves. Is there a second?
I'll second it, Supervisor.
Supervisor Kinnear seconds. Is there any additional discussion or questions about the motion?
This is Chase. I just have one clarifying for direction. As far as obtaining signatures on this resolution, how might I do that today? Since you're here, Tom.
Yeah, I can do it today. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
May it come up?
Yeah. Why don't you? Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions? All in favor? Aye.
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 Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Item 9, 5-year review of the 2017 to 2026 Land and Water Resource Management Plan for the State Land and Water Conservation Board presentation. Back to you, Chase.
All right. Thank you again. At our last meeting, I presented to you our Land and Water Resource Management Plan, quite a lengthy document. I'm not sure if you had a chance to look at it, but basically what we are tasked to do is present a 5-year review to the State Land and Water Conservation Board. And part of that review, they pose 4 questions to us for us to answer. And on this document before you in your packet is my answers to those questions. And I guess I'm wondering if you have any additions or corrections or other things that we need to clarify. But I solicited obviously help from staff here in our division with me not knowing all of the practices that took place over the last 5 years. I was able to put together, the answers to these questions based on their input. And if you'd like, I could go through each one of these in detail. I'm not sure how much you've read through that, but basically the first question wants to know accomplishments that have been directly related to our work plans. And in here, we look at as far as my answer goes, look at the increase in land covered under nutrient management planning, increased use of cover crops and no-till, as well as CREP acreage. CREP is Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program. We also look at a number of planning and implementation efforts, such as the producer-led watershed groups, our DNR lake protection grants, other grants that are associated with the Red Cedar Basin, in addition to some of the other activities like the Livestock Operations Study Group, Groundwater Ad Hoc Committee, and our other partners in the city of Menominee, Stout, and the Red Cedar Water Quality Improvement Partnership. Also mentioned on there would be the work that's been involved so far for updates and revisions to the manure management ordinance. Question 2 looks at areas where we were unable to make direct or desired progress in our work plan. And as a part of this packet, you will see copies of our 2020 and 2021 work plans. But looking at the previous plans from 2016, 2017 on, grazing has been a component of each work plan, which it's apparent that we have not had the staff capacity at the moment or in recent history to implement a grazing program within the county. And we've relied on some of our partner agencies for that. Also, a reoccurring thing in our work plans has been promoting a 3rd crop in rotation. So rather than in instances where land use is basically a corn soybean rotation, trying to provide a 3rd crop in that rotation to provide diversity, improve soil health. That has been a goal for us in the past, and that's been a difficult one, and primarily due to marketability of those 3rd crops. A few other things, if you want to keep scrolling down, Tom, would be the last one as part of that question would be looking at a groundwater monitoring and outreach programming. It's apparent that groundwater is stepped up the interest in the community, and there are several, such as the Groundwater Ad Hoc Committee and other organizations that are focusing on groundwater. And as we react and respond to the recommendations of the Groundwater Ad Hoc Committee, I believe we can move in the direction for more outreach and better programming regarding groundwater. And that was consistent throughout our work plans. However, just until the recent year or two is where that really has changed some of our practicing. So looking at the next 5 years, we would look to improve that activity. Question 3 looks at our priority farm strategy. So we are required to identify a priority farm strategy in our land and water plan. And in our land and water plan, in the first few sentences here of my answer, consists of farmland preservation participants, land and livestock facilities in our TMDL watershed, so the Red Cedar Basin, new and expanding livestock facilities subject to livestock siting rules, complaints, permitted livestock facilities throughout the county's manure management ordinance, livestock facilities in surface water quality management areas, so near streams or lakes, and then voluntary requests from landowners. So that is the strategy identified in our land and water plan. And that's something that I'm going to continue to look at a little bit closer as we get more familiar with our work here to identify some of those priorities. My remaining answer to my question does identify how we've focused on farmland preservation and some of those aspects of our priority farm approach, as well as some grant funding that's associated with it. Moving on to question 4, look at, says provide representative examples that show changes in direction for work planning in the upcoming 5 years, with specific examples provided showing adjustments in planned activities in the county's most recent work plan. So this is, I guess, where I have the opportunity as being new and as the county conservationist for the division to look at the next 5 years. And based on my limited knowledge to date and what I have read in all of these planning documents, how do we see ourselves working with our land and water plan over the next 5-year period? And I think part of that is looking at the existing grant opportunities that we have. We, in the answer to my question here, we talk about the management plan implementation grant. This is identified for our soil health specialist. And to update you with that status, we were not awarded that grant for this coming year or this coming 3 years potentially. So we are back to the drawing board for some of those practices and activities related to that staffing position. And I'm sure you will hear more about that in future meetings as well. But looking at other activities, looking at NR 151, so our ag performance standards and prohibitions, of which are proposed to be in the revision for our manure management ordinance, and looking at implementation for that over the next 5 years, improving implementation. And then also the other thing would be for me to continue to get a better understanding of all the different work groups that are out there involved in Dunn County, and looking at how those all fit together and how that can help direct our work. Some of which also looking at how we can prioritize our watersheds, our sub-watersheds. I think I mentioned this a little bit further down, Tom, if you wouldn't mind scrolling down a little bit more. Basically looking at what's considered HUC 12, so Hydrologic Unit Code 12. So we have approximately 46 HUC 12 watersheds in the county, and most planning activities in the state revolve around watersheds of the HUC 12 size. So the Red Cedar Basin, for example, would be about a HUC 8 or HUC 10, depending on where you draw the lines. We're looking at even smaller watersheds than that as we plan forward. And basically what we would do is apply what data and information we have available to those watersheds in order to help prioritize them based on resource concerns, needs, look at landowner participation in programs such as farmland preservation, as well as looking at any degraded water quality, whether that's groundwater or surface water. The other aspect would also be looking at water quality data that is of higher quality, so higher quality surface water, higher quality groundwater, and ways that we can prioritize those watersheds to ensure that they maintain those standards and qualities. So that's something I'm going to look at moving forward, is how we can, based on staffing capacities and funds that are available, how do we direct those to areas of the county that need our help or need assistance the most. And obviously with the Red Cedar Basin watershed, the TMDL for Tanner and Minoman Lakes, those will be probably as expected some of our higher priority watersheds. But we do have a lot of requests and interest from landowners and participants outside of that watershed. And I think it would be beneficial for us, especially in building community capacity around some of these water quality issues, to continue to work with those that are not in the obvious TMDL or priority watershed areas. So with that, I would be happy to answer any questions. The purpose of this agenda item again is to review these questions with you, as part of a requirement that we do that prior to submitting to the Land and Water Conservation Board. In that packet today are, as I mentioned before, the 2020 and 2021 work plans. And the next step for me would be, if you agree with this process and the answers to these questions, would be to prepare a presentation for the April 6th meeting for the Land and Water Conservation Board. And I actually have a test session for that today. But at this point, we're pretty much up to date as far as the first 5 years of our land and water plan. And we're looking forward to the next 5 years and what that can bring. So I'd be happy to answer any questions or other further comments.
Other questions?
Mr. Chairman,
Oh, sorry.
Supervisor Anderson first and then Supervisor Morehouse.
thank you. First, Chase, well done. Kudos. I like your 5-year report. I'm very impressed. And as I read it, I thought you were a little humble and some other things. So my comments are to be taken not as criticism, but maybe to consider even some other things. I didn't see anywhere in there. I know we've had the Red Cedar demonstration exhibits just east of our Judicial Center, where we work with CVTC and the Extension and NRCS and others, and trying to bring the public out to talk about soil health and also other conservation practices. It has been well received, and I think I didn't see that in there, Chase. Maybe I missed it. And then another thing that you've done for a long time, and this is how I first got to know you, your work with invasive species here in our area, our 5-county area, Pepin County and here in Dunn County. And while that's not part of your work project, I think it's important to let the public know that we are concerned about invasive species here in Dunn County, and you are working with the LCIP on that area. I also compliment you on where I saw you were talking about the pollinator habitat. You know, we own a lot of land here in Dunn County. Dunn County owns it. And I think what we need to do in Dunn County is act, not only promote, but do the act. And so much of our land, and the land that we own here out in the area by 3M county land, I know that area is a great area to demonstrate to the public pollinator habitat, invasive species, and good soil health. And those are areas that we're doing a good job on, not just those areas, but others. And it occurs to me that maybe somewhere in the report, we ought to brag about that a little more of what we're doing. Chase, just for your consideration, I wanted to bring that out to the rest of the committee and see what you think. Thank you. Thank you, Chase, for a good report.
If I might, Chairman Quinn, could I respond?
Yeah, sure.
Points very well taken, Supervisor Anderson. You know, this is the exact reason that we're bringing this before the committee, especially at this point in time when I am just over a month on the job and haven't really experienced everything yet. So you are correct. I have not included the Red Cedar Demo Farm property and project as part of this, and I certainly can add that, and I can with your approval today. As far as invasive species, you know, my experience and based on reviewing a lot of the documentation is that we have been more active in the past than maybe in the recent couple of years. But I think your point is well taken as well. And I will include some of that as part of past practices, but looking at the next 5 years in our participation with those local organizations like LCIP. And then finally, I certainly can add and look into the pollinator habitat work more. and make that as a part of our goals for the next 5 years to improve upon that. So I appreciate your comments and calling me out where I missed things. That's the exact reason we're doing this today.
Thanks. Supervisor Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know this is a requirement, Chase, but I just wanted to say, unless my brain has entirely stopped working, which is possible, we haven't, as a committee, previously seen these kinds of reports that nail down so succinctly our accomplishments, which I think we tend to forget, and which put us in touch with your specific work plans. I thought this was just extremely well done and extremely helpful for me to understand the kinds of things that we have done and where we want to be in the next 5 years. It gives me a better perspective on how I can do my job. And you actually even did that today in your report to the committee, more data. And I find it incredibly helpful, and I just want to compliment you and thank you for doing that. Keep it coming.
Well, thank you. And I'm continuing to learn what past practice was here for our division and in relationship with the oversight committee, and trying to reflect on my past experience in my previous portions of my career. And at this point in time, regarding the 5-year update of the Land and Water Plan, we were required, like you mentioned, to present those documents to you. But each year that we apply for a grant from the Department of Ag, Trade, and Consumer Protection for our staff and support, as well as cost share, we're required to update our internal work plan, if you will. And I think there may be in the future opportunities to share those documents with the committee. Sometimes they're work plans, so things change. Weather tends to be a huge impact on our accomplishments. So I know there are some, at least in my past experience, some reservations with sharing our work plans too widely. Sometimes they may be viewed as a commitment and an expectation, while they should be to some degree. We just got to be careful that we're not committing ourselves to too much work that we know we can't deliver. So that may be some of the reasons for not sharing in the past, but I do intend and look forward to keeping you abreast as to what we're up to and being as transparent as I can.
Thank you. Anybody else? Chase, I would just note, in following up on Supervisor Anderson's comment about the Red Cedar demonstration farm, that I don't think it's in here, but I know that we did have work. Steve's work in particular dealt with identifying and working with some on the ground demonstration farms in the county. You might want to check into that too. So, any other questions? Okay, this is do we need to approve this, Chase, or not yet?
So the DATCAP basically just requires that I present it to you, but I think it'd be helpful for you to do some sort of approval with it, with the added changes of the demo farm, invasive species, and pollinator habitat, and then the other individual landowner demonstration farms.
Right.
I will add that language into here if you're willing and accepting of that to do
Sure.
post approval.
Okay, why don't we do, if someone would make a resolution, sort of noting that the committee has reviewed the plan and that we have approved its submission. Would that be adequate,
Mr.
Chase?
Chairman, I'm happy to move for the approval of that resolution.
We have a motion. Is there a second? Somebody.
Supervisor Bjork,
Supervisor, I'll take Supervisor Bjork. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, carries.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see. We have no other resolutions to the board. Any announcements? Future meeting date, March 23rd. Okay,
Oh, Mr. Chair, just one thing if I could.
sure.
I was busy working, so I catch it right
It's
here.
all right.
I did, we spoke that at the last, your last meeting in April, we spoke that I have two public hearings, two rezone requests. And so, so just letting both staff and the committee know that there will be two public hearings at your last meeting in April. They're fairly straightforward, but still there will be two of them. So.
Okay. Thank you, Bob. All right. With no further discussion,